You're listening to audio from the Decidedly podcast. For more information, find us on Instagram at Decidedly Podcast.
Okay, so I have a question for you. When you work with clients, what are the things that you do to make it easier for them to work with you and to implement their investment plan?
Okay, I've never been asked that question before. So a lot of the work that we do requires action on their part, right? It requires I can't implement every single thing, right? If we're managing investments, we can make the trades and do those things, but I can't do everything. I can't change their 401k investments if I recommend that, right? I don't have their login and password. And even if I did, I'm not going to log in and just do that for them. So sometimes they have to take action. I go, hey, I recommend that you do this thing. You need to now have homework, right? And so what I'll try to do is make sure that we have a representative from our team at their table, at the client's table, sitting next to them when they're doing that homework assignment, right? It might be, hey, let's go change those investment options in your 401k because it's misaligned to your goals. Well, I could just say, all right, go do that. See ya. These are the funds I recommend. What I'll do instead is say, okay, either I or someone on the team, we're going to set up a Zoom call. We're going to get online with you. We're going to show you exactly which buttons to press. That way you don't have to think too hard about it. But removing the extra steps, I think that's really important. What can we do to make it easier? One time I had a client call in and they spoke to an assistant. They said, hey, I can't find this piece of information for this outside investment that I have. I think it was like cost basis or something. I don't have the cost basis for this investment. It wasn't an investment we managed. And the assistant goes, oh, well, you can call them. Their number is 1-800 da 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 da. And I said, no, you gave them work. Now, the reality is that was the work that they were going to do on their own if they didn't call us, right? And when it's not, we didn't have that information. But what we could have done that's a much better experience that's going to help them get the information that they need, that's going to help them make better decisions, is to say, oh, hang on right now. I'm going to conference them in. We'll talk to them together and I'll ask them for it.
Right. Make it easy.
Make it as easy as possible. So we do that not as, not in the way that Amazon does that, because it's not a sales tactic. It's how can we help our clients take action in the way that they say that they want to? How can we make that easy for them?
One of the things that I've done historically is to set up investment savings automatically. So
that's a big one.
Somebody doesn't have to make decisions every single time they want to invest. It's just ongoing.
Yeah. Limit future decisions.
Yeah.
Every decision that I make now is going to have a tree. It's going to grow branches of other decisions that need to be made or will be forced to be made in the future. And if we can keep that a more straight line with fewer stops, then that's going to be helpful.
Okay. I have a question for you. All right.
Another one?
So, Okay, wonderful. So are there addictive experiences that you've fallen into that you've been targeted? In other words, there was some marketing, there was some game that was played on you, and you succumbed to it. There was a biases that was played on you, and you fell for it. And you recognize it now.
I'm sure that there has been plenty. I would say it's been a long time, but when mobile apps, when the games were out, when like Angry Birds first came out, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Right.
Okay. So when the casual mobile games started to first happen, kind of around the time in the 2009-10, when everybody all of a sudden had iPhones, when those came out, I'm so addicted to winning. I want to win. And once they started to implement in-app purchases in these games where, you can just spend $3 and you get this little extra tool that exists within the game that's going to make you better at the game. Oh, that'd be bad. Because I download a game for free and then spend $30 over the course of 6 months, getting better at this stupid little game that I don't even need to be playing.
I have fallen prey to where, in buying a car, when they give you the keys, just drive it around, see how it's going. And then you get in it and you feel like, oh, I like this car. And you don't want to not have the, you don't want to not have it. I had one guy say, just take it home for the weekend.
Oh,
I know.
Oh, that's cheating.
Bad idea. And I'm like, I'm obviously gonna have to buy this car now.
Yeah. No, it was yours the second he suggested that.
Yeah. It was that was tough. So I fell for it.
Well, there's a lot of things that people fall for, and that's one of the things that we talked about today with our guest, Jen Clinehens. We discussed how companies use behavioral science to make you make purchases, decision-making fallacies that lead to faulty choices, and how to avoid falling into those traps. Jen Clinehens is a recognized authority in applied behavioral science. She's founder and managing director of marketing and a product design firm called Choice Hacking, which helps global businesses ethically apply behavioral science and psychology principles. She's the host of a podcast called Choice Hacking and the author of the book, Choice Hacking, How to Use Behavioral Science and Psychology to Create an Experience That Sings. I know I learned a lot from our conversation with Jen. I hope you do too. My name's Sanger Smith with my dad, Sean Smith, and this is Decidedly. Hey, Jen.
Hi guys. How are you?
Doing great. I was looking at your Instagram earlier today, and I was fascinated by the Peloton post.
Oh yeah, the one that just went up.
Yeah. So you broke down how basically why there's this craze for Peloton, and it was fascinating because I got kind of addicted to exercise last year, and void of all of these choice hacking measures that Peloton put on, but I started to get into cycling, and I noticed a lot of people were into Peloton, for example, and they're like a different breed. Like cyclists are crazy, but Peloton folks are a different level of, no hate to anyone who's addicted to the 5 a.m. spins on Peloton.
This episode of Decidedly brought to you by Peloton.
I don't know if that was a ringing endorsement or not.
It's I kind of think of it as like the CrossFit of indoor exercise.
That's such a good way to
I say this as somebody who does Peloton, but I feel like in terms of a scale, I'm probably middle area versus some people get really, really into it. I'm a fan, but I'm not a crazy person.
So walk through those because they use some biases, right? And that's really your background when you look at being sort of an authority in behavioral psychology is how do different companies influence our decision making? What are they doing? How are they leaning into certain biases that we have to direct choices and decisions? So what did you see that Peloton was doing?
Sure. I mean, I think first of all, so yes, I mean, I work in behavioral science and psychology in customer experience. So that could be anything from marketing and advertising to product experience, or in this case, it's mainly the product experience at Peloton. And what I found is, you do have some businesses that'll do things consciously, right? They hire behavioral scientists and they go through the whole process and they say oh, yes, very deliberately, we're going to do all these different things. But the interesting thing about Peloton is the way they designed their experience. They actually looked at places like Apple, like Netflix, like Spotify. So they looked at what they would consider sort of, I guess, addictive experiences. And I say addictive when I say Peloton, but in an ethical way, right? They're not telling you to do anything, within bounds, right? There is such a thing as exercise addiction, and that's obviously not what I mean. But, with Peloton, I think they were really smart in that they created this digital ecosystem around this idea of exercise because they knew it would be a challenge. I mean, everybody, I think, has one of those Nordic Track, or what was the Bowflex? Do you remember the Bowflex? So that everybody would throw their clothes on the Bowflex after you pay just 30 payments of $30.
Yeah, we had a treadmill that we stopped calling the treadmill and started calling the clothes hanger because it would just hang. We just put clothes on it.
Definitely. I mean, and I think that they saw the potential in, the first thing is a social connection, right? So there's a thing called a parasocial relationship. So you see this a lot with YouTubers, with celebrities. It's kind of like a one-way relationship, right? And they knew that people love to be social, that making something social, we know from behavioral science research and things, is a good way to make it sticky. And so one of the ways that they did that was through the relationships with the instructors. So you get these instructors on, and there's different instructors for different, like flavors of music, and, there's different ages and sort of different approaches to how the actual classes work. And personally, when I first started using Peloton, I had to go through the whole like, oh, so-and-so is the most popular, and take, he or she's course or their classes and go like, okay, this is too, they're encouraging me too much. I need someone to like yell at me. The people have different sort of like motivational styles. And where people were like, making it a very like soulful experience, that might really work for somebody who was into something like SoulCycle, or, like that's just like what speaks to them from a motivational level. But for me, I just wasn't really responding to it. So when I finally found instructors that I enjoyed the playlist, I was really into it. And then you start to, again, go back to parasocial relationship. It's like, well, I sign up for this course or this class, and I don't want to disappoint my instructor, even though they don't know you're there. It doesn't make any difference to them. I mean, I was reading one of these New York Times articles about Peloton kind of at the height of COVID and sort of the power of Peloton. And they had instructors that would fill, 25,000 plus people in a class. And that could fill Madison Square Garden completely sold out, and then some. Right. So that's a lot of people kind of doing something together as a social act, which obviously during sort of COVID lockdowns and things, like people were really craving that. But that social element, I think, is something that, it's really baked into kind of like the core of the product. And it's so important to make something social. They do a couple other things when it comes to the social component of it as well. So, you can schedule rides with friends, you can share things, you get badges that you can share with other people. So you start to get achievements. So that's kind of, like the basis of gamification, right? I get a badge. I feel good about myself. I'm motivated to kind of stay on the bike or get on the bike. One thing they do, which is very powerful, it's kind of out of the realm of the social bit, but it's more into something called goal gradient. So goal gradient is this principle that basically says the closer we get to an end point, like the more we want to keep going, the faster we go. Right. So the research was basically around like mice, and they would get mice in a maze, and they found that the closer they got to the cheese, the faster they would go. And you see it with things like coffee loyalty cards. So if you've ever been to like a coffee shop and you used to get like the little paper cards, and somebody would like, oh, here's your paper card, and they would stamp it twice, and you go like, oh, I must be so special. They love me. Oh, they're going to give me 2 stamps. No, that's a strategy. Because they know the closer you get, the more you want to go in. Oh, no, I have to go to this coffee shop, not that coffee shop, because I'm so close to my goal. And they found that with loyalty programs.
Wait, so are you saying that that's a purposeful sort of trained strategy to kind of give you a little extra stamp as you get closer to the end?
It's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because I think to say that people are doing it consciously is a stretch. Like, I don't think that the barista knows about the goal gradient effect, and that it actually does make it faster.
Okay, I didn't know if it was in the training or something.
Who knows? It could be out there someplace.
Maybe it is.
But, really, I think it's something like when you look at sales and customer experience and retail stores and things like that, there's so much stuff that they do that has a scientific reason behind it. Like there's a reason why it works, but they don't necessarily know that that's what's happening. Yeah. They like if you take IKEA, for example, like IKEA, obviously, the world's biggest furniture store, they do a ton of things around behavioral science, but they never, as far as I know, they don't consciously say, like, oh, what about this psychological principle? Let's see if we can experiment with it. Really, it just came from like 60 or 50 years of, hey, if we, stack up our products in a certain way, if we price things a certain way, we just know it'll work because so many people come through the store. If it doesn't work, like retail stores especially are very transaction driven. So if it drives less sales, they'll change it. Walmart's the same way. So Sam Walton wasn't a behavioral scientist, but Sam Walton used a lot of behavioral science principles without really knowing it when he was designing Walmart. So it kind of the same thing.
What were some of those behavioral principles?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one. So Walmart, they do a couple of things really well. From a high level, they're actually really good at interrupting our behavioral scripts, right? So behavioral scripts are basically things like if you go into a restaurant, you know they're going to come up and say, do you want any appetizers? And then do you want dinner? And then, oh, do you want something, for dessert? That's a behavioral script. That's what you expect when you go into a restaurant.
Yeah.
If you went into a restaurant and they said, would you like to start with a dessert? You would say like, oh, I don't know. I'm all turned around now because that's not what I expected. It's not what I trained myself to do. But Walmart does that in the way that they sort of arrange the store. So basically you come in like kind of an opposite end. They were one of the first companies to really do this idea of, you had like the dual entrances, and a lot of stores you would come in the right and go right to left. Yeah. In Walmart, you tend to go left to right.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I didn't really think about that, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah. And it's just one of those things again. I mean, they just try things and it happens. The other example would be if you kind of go through Walmart, they have something called, Action Alley. There you go. My brain's not working. It's the end of the day. So Action Alley is when you go down the big aisles in Walmart, and they have those big bins in the middle of the aisles, and they're full of like DVDs or like TVs that are on sale. That's Action Alley. And it's kind of clutters up the space that they have these big kind of like bins and displays in the middle of an aisle. But that's where they put the sales. It's where they put the things that are going to kind of make you stop and go, oh, well, that's really interesting. I get 2 DVDs for $3 or whatever it is now. And actually, when they went through, it was a little while ago now, they went through kind of an innovation project at Walmart. And they were looking at places like the Apple Store, and they said, oh, it's so clean in there. And like, that's what we need. We need to get rid of all of these bins. Let's get rid of Action Alley. And they did, and their sales went, into the basement, like in terms of what they had been doing. And they brought it back, I think, within 2 years. So it's something that's really effective for them. And it kind of speaks to this idea of like when you're making decisions as a shopper, they're not necessarily the most rational. And a lot of times, what you think might work in your mind, which makes logical sense, well, that's not really what people do because we don't really behave in a very logical or sort of rational way. So a couple examples from Walmart.
So I have a question for you on that. So you give 2 examples of retailers that really have approached that buying decision or that consumer experience very differently, right? Mm-hmm. One is Walmart. They're putting a lot of, I don't want to say clutter in a bad way, but they've got Action Alley. They've got all this stuff everywhere, as opposed to the Apple Store, which is almost the opposite, very minimalistic, and yet they're both working. So what behaviors or biases is one playing on that the other decided to abandon and play on a completely different one? Because you can't play on both of those at the same time. But what are they doing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, if you think about the products that Apple sells, I mean, yes, they're ubiquitous. Like so many people have an iPhone now, but they are a luxury product. I mean, when you position them against yeah, exactly. They're expensive. I mean, for years and years, I had the first iPhone all the way up until I think 2 years ago. I had every single iPhone that came out. And eventually I just was like, what am I doing? This is so expensive. I guess I just hit a certain age and I was like, you know what? Do I really need this? And I switched to Android. And, it's basically an identical experience, but I still miss my iPhone, right? Because it's like a luxurious experience. It's like got a weight in your hand. Like the product is very tactile. I mean, the design is something that, Apple as a company has always really been, cognizant of. They want to feature their products. So first of all, they're selling something that's a more like upscale product. So another analogy with that would be like clothing stores. The more expensive a clothing store is, the fewer clothes you see in the store. You know what I mean? Like it's not like a TJ Maxx where you go and you have to kind of go through all the racks and things. And that's sort of it's a cue.
Is that because it's going to require more confidence? People are less likely to whimsically make $1,000 purchase than they are a $1 purchase.
I mean, potentially. Yeah.
I can understand if they put the 50-cent candy in the checkout line, I'll just get candy. Yeah, sure. Shovel it in the shopping cart. If they put, a bunch of TVs up at the front, nobody's doing that. Nobody's whimsically saying, yeah, give me a plasma screen when they're checking out at Target.
As an impulse buy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You'd be surprised how many people will impulse buy a TV though. Like it's part of the thing with Walmart is, Walmart has big carts. And part of the reason they expanded the size of the carts was so you could go to the grocery store or the, Walmart and get anything at Walmart, right? But a lot of people go for groceries.
Yeah.
You could get the milk, the orange juice, and then the cart was big enough to fit a TV if you wanted it. You know what I mean? And there are some studies that, have come up with this hypothesis. I think it probably needs a little bit more study, but the idea that the bigger the grocery cart is, the more you spend. It's because you subconsciously, you're like kind of primed to fill it.
Yeah.
So
you're walking around with an empty basket like a dork. What am I doing?
Yeah.
Having my one thing of orange juice and a pair of socks and a.
Oh, so funny. One time, and I've noticed Costco does this, is that Costco has, sort of as a format similar to a Walmart or a Sam's rather. But they'll change around the merchandise to different places. And they have this action alley kind of in the middle of the store that has different stuff every time. But it causes me, as I go through it, to wander all of the aisles because I never know what I'm going to see.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that that's a purposeful behavior that they're driving me into.
It is.
Yeah, but I end up
Absolutely.
sort of making some impulse buys. There was one time a business partner and I went in and we needed a new flat screen TV from one of the offices. So we said, hey, let's just go up to Costco and grab a TV. So we go up there and we get that's the first thing when you come in. We grab this big TV and we kind of wander through and we're like, oh, you know what? We need to, let's get some sausages and make some sausages, Friday, let's cook them out on the back of the barbecue. Like, yeah, that's great. So we just keep going, and then we pass by. Oh, you know what? Grab that toilet paper. We need the toilet, and so we got three things basically, and we're going through this big TV and some sausages and some toilet paper, and the cashier kind of looks at us. He goes, "You guys got a big weekend planned?"
Oh God.
not on purpose, but yeah.
It just happens. I mean, if you took a moment and looked at what it was in everybody's cart in Costco, and we've all done that. I think gone into Costco and somebody gets like one of the flatbeds and gets 50 boxes of hot dogs. You're like, what is going on? What are you doing? And you just kind of create a story in your head, like, how are they going to use all that stuff? I don't know.
So what are the other decisions that companies are making that most of us wouldn't know about, playing on these biases that we all sort of carry with us as consumers and customers in these establishments? What are some of the other things that they're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question because, again, I think it kind of goes back to this idea that, some brands are making these conscious decisions and other brands are just kind of looking at what works, and they'll do more of what works, and they'll kind of figure it out. Like with your Costco example, they know that treasure hunting, which is what you're describing, where they move things around, especially staples, is good for the bottom line. So if you're always there for the big thing of detergent, and you're going to go find the detergent, but they've moved it, all of a sudden you go buy a bunch of different things, and you see something that's novel, something that's new. You get a little hit of dopamine in your brain. You're like, oh my God, it's new. What is this cool thing? What does it do? Oh my God, it's only $50. Of course, I'll throw it in this giant cart. And all of a sudden you've spent, $500 at Costco when you went in for, one TV. But yeah, and there are brands that are definitely, hiring behavioral scientists who, are kind of coming from like a research or an academic background. And, those folks can do like a variety of things, right? So they can come in and help design a product, whether it's a digital product or, like an app that people want people to use, like Weight Watchers, which is now WW, has, behavioral science team that helps them figure out how to get people to do something that's healthy, which is ethical, right?
Weight Watchers changed their name?
They did. They're WW now.
Okay. So that seems from a branding perspective, I know we're not the branding experts here, but we're just going with initials now. Hopefully people know what we're all about.
It's a good question. I mean, I think the thought process was something along the lines of, we're not just about weight, we're about healthy living. And so they thought, oh, okay. Well, we're an older brand, like maybe let's, rework it. And people know what Weight Watchers is, so let's change it around. I mean, obviously I wasn't a part of that decision. All I know is kind of like secondhand knowledge, but I think that's what they were thinking. I mean,
you kind of convinced me. They should, they should consider your advocacy there for PR, because that one comment, okay, that's not about weight. Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
Anyway, tangent. So when it comes to digital products, how are companies applying these how are they keying in on these biases? It seems very obvious when you understand it, how that's happening in a physical store, by rearranging the store, by placing things in certain areas. Obviously we can see product placement online, but it seems a lot more difficult to execute on.
Yeah, there's a couple different ways you could think about it. So if you think about something like a social network, so a social network, essentially like, a Meta or whoever, their business model is based on advertising. So the more you engage with their platform, the more advertising they can show you. Therefore, the more money they make, the more data they can gather, the more value you kind of bring to them as, for lack of a better term, the product, right? So that's the old kind of, saying, right? If it's the product is free, then you're the product.
Yeah, sure.
So they know that they have to encourage engagement. And I think, and again, this is just my opinion, but it seems like for many years it was, engagement at any cost. And so doing things like, the never ending scroll. So if you go through like a Facebook timeline, it just never ends, right? Now, Instagram, if you noticed, has a feature that basically says like, you've reached the end of your updates. So now, okay, I'm all caught up. This is good. In China, they're doing some things with, kids under a certain age. They'll kind of say like, hey, okay, you've had enough of this app. Like it's time to go. But, in sort of the beginning times of just understanding like what is social media and how do we keep people engaged and how do we do all of that, you would see a lot of these sort of infinite scrolls. And they knew that you would kind of have this, anticipation of like, what's next? What's new? Am I missing something? So this idea of, FOMO, the fear of missing out, drives a lot of human activity, human behavior. I don't want to lose, like something called loss aversion, right? Humans don't like to lose. They don't like to miss out. And especially with something like a social media company, there's that social component. And you want to feel like you're up to date on all the news and you're part of the social group. And so things like that, that's engagement at any cost, right? Yeah. That's engagement at the cost of healthy behavior online. And it's a good example, I think, too, of, especially in a digital environment, you get a lot of feedback, you get a lot of data. People do things just like a retail environment, but like on steroids, right? You get billions of people using a platform. You can understand really quickly what works and what doesn't. And, obviously, like there's ethical implications there for testing your experience on people. I mean, I know Facebook got in trouble for running, I think, A/B tests on users without telling them, for instance, and, not making them aware that they were actually part of a split test, things like that.
What were they testing?
Oh God, I have to go back and look at it, but I believe it was something to do with what we're talking about. So, like engagement, what they show you, how you engage with it.
Back up a little bit. Tell me what's an A/B test and how would that manifest itself on a social media?
So an A/B test is basically you have like an apple and an orange. Okay. And half the people that get on the website will see an apple and half of the people that get on the website will see an orange. Okay. So that can take any form, right? It could be the color of a call to action button. It could be the background color of the website. It could be the headline on the website, but it's basically a split test. It's just 50-50.
Okay. But now I assumed that was happening to me anyway. Are you saying that that's something that they should have an ethical responsibility to disclose?
I mean, if you want my personal opinion, I do think that the more we start to use these, cognitive biases and the more you start to test on users and things like that, I do think that there isn't, the burden of, disclosure really rests on the brands. And I think, you do get the things like, privacy disclosures where people scroll through and they're like, yeah, whatever. But I do think that they need to design those disclosures in such a way that A, you can opt out. So you know that you're opted in. So you can say like, oh, I want to opt out of all testing. It's not something I want to be a part of. And, maybe not everybody will opt out, but just letting people know like, okay, this is something that you should be aware that is happening is, I think, important. And I think just, thinking about, again, this idea of like engagement at any cost. So testing is a part of it for sure. But the way that algorithms are designed is really important. So if you think about, again, I'm going to use Facebook or Meta now, again, because they've gotten in trouble for a couple of these things and it's public record and everything. So they're not the only ones doing it. But their algorithm for a long time rewarded so you know how you had likes and you have like different emotions on the likes, and you have like an anger, and you have like, you know, like you have a thumbs up and you have some other things. Basically, when people get angry, it was upweighted in the algorithm. So what happens is the algorithm is programmed a certain way. It's not a person, but it's programmed by people. So it has sort of these cognitive biases like built into it, because that's just how people think. So for a long time, you had anger upweighted in the algorithm. So the more a post was divisive, it made people upset, the more it would get shown. And then it makes more people upset. And this is more and more engagement. And all of a sudden, every time you go onto Facebook, you feel like you're having like a panic attack because everything you see is like, oh, what is this? It's making me really upset. So things like that. I mean, I think designers really, the more they become educated about behavior, you know, like cognitive biases or behavioral science principles, things like that, I think the more important it also becomes that they start to develop like a personal code of conduct. And I talk a little bit about that in my book, actually, Choice Hacking. This idea that, you know, is what you're doing creating value for a customer? Is what you're doing driving a behavior that results in something that when you notice it isn't the best thing for the customer or the user? So it's sort of the action after the action, right?
So, you know, what we're really interested in is how individuals can use an understanding of these cognitive biases and decision-making principles, frameworks to make better decisions in their own lives. And now that companies are understanding that, and they're spending more time investing in how to, you know, I don't want to say exploit, but understand our own individual decision-making habits. How can we as individuals use that knowledge, knowing, hey, this is what companies are doing? How can we use that to better our own lives?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, it's like a lot of things. I think education is a big part of it. So on my site, Choice Hacking, I do talk a lot about all of these different principles and the way that kind of businesses can use them. But there is a flip side to that. And I do write a little bit about that as well. It's going to start to become more and more what I write about. Because what I've found is, you know, I wrote all this stuff about, you know, this is how a business might fool you by using like anchoring on a price tag. And it used to be $100 and now it's $20. And what I found was, yes, I was getting like marketers who were looking at that and saying like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, maybe I should apply that. But I was getting, I guess for lack of a better term, like normal people who would see these articles and go like, oh my God. Every time I go into, you know, TJ Maxx or Marshall's, I look at that tag and I feel like I have to buy it. It's 80% off. But now I know, well, yeah, maybe it's 80% off and, you know, maybe it's not. Like maybe that's something that I can use to kind of, I guess, monitor, control my own behavior, or just be aware of the fact that I'm a little bit like emotionally aroused, for lack of a better term, right? This is a scientific term. I'm upset. This thing is making me upset, or this thing is making me feel like I'm going to miss out. And just knowing, you know, that those principles exist and being able to kind of monitor your own sort of reactions to things and say like, oh, well, now I know that a lot of decision making is emotional. So when I get emotional, I should probably not make any big decisions.
Yeah.
You know, I shouldn't be making a decision from a place that isn't, I mean, and obviously we can't do this every decision we make, right? If we had to like, if you're getting emotional about what socks to pick in the morning, you know, and had to go through like a list of pros and cons of what outfit, you would never make it out the door. But with important decisions, things like, you know, spending money or buying a house or whatever it might be, like being aware of these cognitive biases is really helpful. And taking the time to kind of de-bias your decision making is helpful as well.
Yeah, I think the awareness of it is definitely the biggest step. It's the initial step. Sean and I can kind of understand what the follow-up steps would be for those big decisions. When it comes to the smaller decisions, is there anything other than awareness that we could be doing to prevent overspending when we go to shop at Walmart, to prevent making, you know, medium-sized purchases? Maybe it's $1,000 iPhone that we don't really want or need, but we buy it anyway. Or is there something that we can do beyond being aware of it? Because it seems to me in my own practice as an advisor that, you know, if I focus on awareness with a client, that will stop a certain percentage of bad decisions. there are a lot of times where people go, you know what? I know that I'm mad, or I know that I'm scared, or I know that I'm excited. I know that I probably should not be making emotional decisions in the state, and I'm going to do it anyway.
I'm doing it anyway.
And I go, you know what? At least you know that.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a lot of self-awareness to even know, like, oh, I'm upset right now, but I'm going to make a decision. I think the biggest thing is, we know from just behavioral science in general and tons of studies on this, that knowledge is very rarely enough to change behavior. A lot of people know things and they intend to act in a certain way. Like, I know exercise is good for me, but doesn't mean I'm going to exercise. You know what I mean? It's like, there's other things that have to happen for me to make that decision. But things like designing your environment. So it's an old strategy, but the envelope budgeting method, like using cash, like only taking a certain amount of, money with you to the store. You take $100 in cash to go buy groceries. You literally cannot buy, that, sweatshirt or, pair of shoes or whatever you want.
You got to leave your phone at home too now with Apple Pay. The amount of times I've been somewhere and have no intention to buy something, was not shopping, and then someone's like, "Hey, you could here's a little treat." Oh, I can just double click my screen and now I've got it. I'm about to delete Apple Pay.
Can you delete it?
Yeah, it's so tough too, because for a lot of things, like, it's really convenient. So I have Android Pay on my phone, and the reason it got there, because I kept it off for a long time, because for exactly that reason, I was like, oh God, if I can just tap my phone, then it's all over. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so I'm going to go into the city, do a lot of things. And, for many years I was working in London. So I live in a place called Berkshire. It's like west of London. I was doing kind of like the train commute in, and then you get on the tube and you're exhausted. And by the time you get to the end, it's just a whole thing. But I was forced to put it on there because of the tube, because it's so much easier to remember my phone. And there were a couple times where I'd just forgotten a card. I was like, oh my God, I can't go anywhere.
Yeah.
I can't get on the tube. I can't pay for a cab. And I thought, okay, well, let me just, put Android Pay on here, and then I could just tap the phone. And I don't have to worry about having a card. So that's how I got on there. And then,
and it never's coming off.
Coincidentally,
it's stuck forever.
All of a sudden,
we get one little, luxury or convenience in life, and it's, how could I have ever lived? And now it's like, I'm not going to delete Apple Pay either, because Jen, what if I'm driving across country, I lose my wallet, I leave it at a Love's truck stop in Amarillo, and I don't notice until I get to Pueblo, Colorado, and then, oh my gosh, I need to get gas. I gotta have Apple Pay.
That's all over.
I gotta have Apple Pay. And
you're stranded somewhere.
And now I can't escape the, Sunday morning donut purchase when I'm out for a jog. I left my wallet at home, but I still.
And that's exactly what happened to me. I was like, all of a sudden, I'm going to Starbucks in Paddington Station. Every time I go in, I was like, oh wait, well, it's because this didn't happen before I had Android Pay on my phone.
Yeah.
And now it's like, oh, okay.
Man, if I could.
Now it's easy. Just tap the phone.
If we could figure out, I think if we could figure out how to get comfortable with removing luxuries that have been introduced into our lives, I think that would solve so many poor decision-making behavior patterns.
Yeah, I think the other thing to think about as well is a concept called friction. So this idea, there is something called the cashless effect. I mean, we're talking about, these tap to pay things. So cashless effect basically removes something called the pain of payment. So when you pay with cash, there's a psychological pain. Like, oh, the money is actually leaving my hand. It's gone. There it goes. And it doesn't matter how good of a budgeter you are, how kind of loose you might be with money. There is an amount of psychological pain when you can see like the cash leaving your hand, as opposed to a card where it's like, oh, it's not, I'll worry about it next time. Right.
Well,
like
that's why
gone.
casinos use chips and not money, I would think,
Yeah.
It's just
so Sean and I were in DC a couple of weeks ago, and we were like paying the bellhop or something, right? And they didn't take card. And Sean was like, oh man, you got like $10. Like, we got to pay him. And I just kind of went, ugh. And it wasn't because I didn't have the money. It was because I had a single $100 bill, and I had that $100 bill in my wallet for 2 months. And I was just looking for like the best moment to spend this $100 bill. And the amount of time
bellhop at the hotel.
Well, that was our only option, right? It was like, oh, we got to go to the airport. But it was so funny to me because I had this $100 bill in my wallet for 2 months and couldn't find a way to spend it. But if you go look through my bank history of how many times I spent, $100 on something or $90 on something, there were more than enough times where I could have just laid that down. But it was the physical cash. I'm like, there's something about this bill that I don't want to lose. It's special.
Oh, I've seen that too.
Yeah, positive.
Yeah, I like that idea of friction, just kind of making it hard.
Yeah.
Making it hard for yourself.
Making it difficult on yourself. And it's interesting because, like, I think to your point, like the world is kind of designed to be more and more frictionless. And then you have to ask the question, who is making it frictionless? And the answer is usually a business. And why they're making it frictionless is usually so you will spend more money without thinking about why you're spending money. Like, Prime is a great example. So initially, like Jeff Bezos went to Amazon and said, look, we need to build a moat around our best customers. How do we do that? How do we build a moat? And that's what they came up with, this idea of Prime. And what they found is not only obviously do people who are using Amazon Prime shop from Amazon more often and spend more money, they'll start a product search at Amazon. So they don't go to Google and say like, oh, I need a pair of red sweatpants. Mm-hmm. They go to Amazon.com and they type in red sweatpants and they start and end the whole product search there, which is a very different behavior. And the reason that they're doing that is because, it's frictionless. First of all, you get that, overnight shipping, the Prime free stuff. They say it's free. It's not really free. You pay for it every year, right?
Yeah.
But the feeling of getting free shipping, the feeling of getting something overnight, it feels painless. It feels frictionless. It feels really easy. And then you get after effects for the business where it's like, okay, well, they're not going anywhere else. Why would I ever go to Walmart.com and order something when I can go to Amazon?
The buy now button is, that's borderline evil. It's just, in 10 years, it'll be blink at your screen. You won't even have to push your finger on anything. It'll be smile if you want to buy these red sweatpants. And then you got it.
Give us a thumbs up. Yeah, sure. Throw it in my bank account. It's fine. They'll drone it right to your house. It'll be there, Amazon now. I want it.
Yeah.
Tomorrow is too late. I need it in an hour. I need it in 20 minutes. I need you to deliver it to me before I even think that I need it.
Yeah.
That is the elimination of friction. It's like an Elon Musk brain link chip in our brain that goes like, oh, I could really go for like some donuts. And there they are before you even think of it. But, friction can be a good thing sometimes. Like, having a decision that isn't like the easiest thing in the world to go get is sometimes really good. You know what I mean? Like, and I think it's interesting too, like living, so like I've lived in the UK now for 5 or 6 years, and I lived in Australia for a year before that. So I've not lived in the US. Obviously I've been to the US, but not for a while. For about 6 years, I've lived outside, and it's just a very different, sort of environment where things are, I guess for a lack of a better term, like less convenient. Like obviously they have drive-throughs and things here. Like it's not that doesn't exist, but it's much less of like a driving culture. It's much less of a convenience culture. And obviously that stuff, I'm not saying it's better or worse. I'm just saying like, if I want to go to McDonald's, it's like they would say in England, it's a faff. It's a pain in the ass, basically.
Yeah.
To go do it.
I think that is an example of something where if I have the awareness, I can implement steps in my own life to help make better choices. As you were sharing that, it reminded me of a client of mine. I needed him to like log into his account and do something, and he didn't know his username and password. So I helped him get it set up. Boom, here's the username and password. Mm-hmm. Boom, okay, he goes in and he does it. Then a month later, we're at the same point. I'm like, hey, I need you to go, check your account, do something. He goes, I don't know my username or password. I said, we just talked like a month ago. Like, what are you talking about? I said, I even like read it to you. I sent it to you. I know you have it. He goes, oh, I deleted it. I go, man, why would you delete that? Like, you just missed talking to me. He goes, no, I did it on purpose. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, if I have it, then I can log in and I can check my account balance every day. And I'll do that. And if I do that, then I'm going to get worried. And if I worry, then I'm going to call you. And if I call you while I'm worried, I'm going to tell you something that I'm going to make bad choices. Mm-hmm. I go, okay, yeah, cool. Well, I don't know your password either. Maybe you shouldn't have it. But if we can, use that, create friction to make it more difficult for us to have maybe purchasing habits that we know we're prone to, but we don't want to participate in, that's huge. When you work with larger companies, and you don't necessarily, I'm not asking you to name a specific company, but I'm interested in hearing what you think is the worst decision that a company has made to try to affect decision-making of their consumers, or a decision that they made that unintentionally negatively affected decision-making pattern in consumers.
Are you saying a purposeful decision to lean into biases to drive consumer behavior, but that it backfired or didn't work? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think any business, and I would say some of the businesses I've worked with, like, have sort of a, I don't know, for lack of a better term, like a bad reputation sometimes, that they make certain things too easy, or, they're pushing a product that isn't like the healthiest thing or something like that. But what I found is, I mean, the brands that I've worked with have actually been really, really aware of, like, hey, we need to make this easier, but making it too easy isn't good for the customer. It isn't like they're not going to be a customer for life. And you'd be surprised, because most of these brands are very conscious of, A, what are customers going to think of what we're doing? B, like, how are they going to respond to it? And then C, like, what is the action after the action? So, if I get these people to buy 15 pairs of sneakers, is that really the right thing for this customer? Might be for some customers, because maybe some customers need 15 pairs of shoes. But for most customers, it's a better proposition to have them buy, one more pair a year for the next 15 years. They're a customer for longer. They'll buy other things. And that's not like a specific example, but I think it's something I do like to share, because I do think there is sort of this, it's customers versus the brands. And yes, there are brands out there that do, unethical stuff, or, they're not forced to change until, there's customers demanding that they change.
Yeah.
But especially because I work in customer experience, so I've done everything from, like, physical, regular retail, digital retail, apps, like anything you can think of. And it is hard to change customer behavior. It is hard to change user behavior. So there's also, like, this other point to make about behavioral science, that, like, it's very helpful to know this about customers, to be able to kind of see through their eyes and step into their shoes using the biases and the behavioral science stuff. But if I, as somebody who applies behavioral science, could go into a business and say, behavioral science is a silver bullet, it's going to change the way you do everything, you're going to sell twice as much to everybody else. I would be living on a private island right now. If anybody could say that, they wouldn't be working anymore, because there would be a dump truck full of money in front of their house. Like, there are no silver bullets in business, right? Like, context is everything, first of all. So, I think when you have these behavioral science principles, or these cognitive biases, or whatever it might be, a lot of times, they're proven out in an academic environment. B, they're usually proven in a certain type of academic environment. So a lot of times they're experiments that are done on, like, college kids at, like, Harvard, right? Doesn't mean they're any smarter or any different, but they're, of a certain affluence level. They have a certain set of experiences. It's like they're going to respond in different ways than a group of folks who, like, are in Hong Kong or South Africa. And that's not necessarily, a cultural thing. There's a context thing there. Yes, culture is a part of it. Affluence is a part of it. And I think, for many years, and I wouldn't call myself a behavioral scientist because I don't do research, right? I apply behavioral science. I'm an applied behavioral science person. But for many, many years, a lot of the research around these cognitive biases and things were very focused on a certain part of the world with a certain type of person. And I think now there's more of an impetus to get, like, diverse research and things like that. But the point I'm trying to make is, while these academic studies are really good, they're not bulletproof, and they're not silver bullets. Yeah. I don't think of any more, like, gun analogies. And they had to get tested in the real world, because testing something in a laboratory at MIT, while it's great and it's fabulous and you learn a lot of things, if you take that finding and then try to turn it into, like, I don't know, a display in a Walmart in Bentonville, Arkansas, it's a very different context. It's a very different environment. And with some customers, some things work and other things don't. Like, I'll give you an example. So social proof is something that's really persuasive, very powerful.
Yes.
So it is, I would say, probably the top 2 or 3 the studies have found the most persuasive across cultures, across, age groups, anything you could think of. Has somebody else done this? And if they've done this, then I should do it too. But
if lots of people do it, then no matter how bad it looks to me, then it must be all right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I found in a few different contexts, working with a few different fast food brands, that with food, social proof does not work. People do not care.
Oh, really?
Yeah. If you talk about like menu items and things, and there might be other cases where people have tried this and it worked, but every time I've tried it, it's like, hey, our most popular product today is this. And people go like, okay, but I really don't care because like I don't like fish or whatever it is.
Okay.
And they're like, okay, that's fine. Like I know that it's good, but it's not really for me. And
it's
so
like,
for whatever reason,
I'll go to a restaurant and ask the waiter, so like, what's your most popular thing here? Like, what do people get when the menu is too long and I can't decide? And I don't ever listen to what they say.
Yeah. You just want to know.
If I want McDonald's tonight and I'm telling myself I probably shouldn't have McDonald's, all it takes is me seeing one person who's eating McDonald's, and it does not matter if they are a 500-pound like slob. It does not matter what they look like. It doesn't matter that I can obviously see the negative health effects. I will go, okay, I can have McDonald's. Well, they're doing it. I mean, it's fine.
Have you ever had the opposite effect? You go somewhere and you're the whatever, the donut shop or the ice creams, and you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna really enjoy this treat. You kind of looking around and everybody just looks so unhealthy, and you're just like, oh, what am I doing? I've made a poor decision. Look who I was surrounded by. What am I doing here?
Yeah.
Oh, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, if you think about social proof on that level not working for like an individual product, think about it on like a restaurant level. So think about like McDonald's and billions sold or served. That that was their like classic bit of social proof. And if you think about it on a brand level, that makes sense because like, oh, if billions and billions of people have eaten here, then there must be something for me. But it doesn't mean that I want to get what every single one of those billions and billions of people ate. That they got, hamburger with extra ketchup or whatever. Like, it's just not for me. Like, my order is more personal. But the fact that the store has actual, like, social proof that people like it, or there's, like, a line out the door. Or I'm sure you've been to the, the new restaurant on the block and you kind of look in the door and you're like, oh, is it full? Oh, it's kind of empty. So let's try someplace else. You know what I mean? Like, you want to make sure other people
What do you
like
think's the most difficult tactic that companies use that is the most difficult to defend against? As I go in and I as a consumer, I'm making decisions every day, right? To buy, to not buy, to go in, to not go in, whatever it is. What's the most powerful tactic you've seen companies use? The one that just really, really is hard to defend against?
As in, like, when a company uses it, it's like it's all over for most people.
Yeah, whether it's social proof or whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like, again, like there's no silver bullets, but scarcity is one that can work really well. Not false scarcity, because that's a whole different thing. Like that's an unethical, that's a deceptive pattern. We don't do those.
Okay.
But if you look at a company like Supreme, so Supreme or like, like Alpha Elite or Gymshark, or like a lot of these other brands that are built on drops. So the drop model can be really, really effective for getting people to buy. I don't even know what
the drop model is.
So the drop model is basically like, I made 100 of these and they're going to drop at midnight. And when they're gone, they're gone. They're never coming back.
Gotcha. Limited supply kind of thing. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And, that from a business perspective, makes a lot of sense initially. Like, and you've seen a lot of these companies who started with the drop model now kind of expanding into like having to have inventory and things, because from a business perspective, it's not very practical. But if you want to make sure that you're going to move a lot of inventory really quickly, that's the best way to do it, right? Is to say like, okay, well, we've made purposely probably less than we thought that we would need.
I see that happen all the time. When if you go, there's a website, a travel website where I'll go and I'll buy a flight or book a flight, and they'll, they always say, only 3 seats left at this price or something like this. I think QVC does that too. I think on their, this is how many left of these items that we're pitching right now. So I see that happen a lot. It must be incredibly effective, as you said.
Yeah, it is. The time when scarcity is most effective, though, is when it's sort of combined with social proof, right? So I'll give you a good example. It's like, well, there's probably a couple of ones, but there's a retailer in the UK called John Lewis. John Lewis is kind of like the Nordstrom of the UK, right? So it's nice. It's a little upscale. And you go on their website, and if you're looking at something, it'll say something along the lines of like, popular 25 people bought this in the last 24 hours or whatever, it's some kind of thing around like a lot of people are looking at this or a lot of people have this in their cart. And even though they're not saying, oh, we only have 100 of these and 50 people have bought one, you better hurry up, which would be the classic form of scarcity, the fact that you can imagine other people competing. So this like social component of scarcity, other people are competing for something. Oh, okay, I want it more because I'm fighting out other people, as opposed to just, like, we made 50 of these, like, here, come take one. It's like I guess the classic example is toilet paper and COVID, right?
Yeah.
You don't know why. You go into the grocery store, everybody's fighting over toilet paper. You're like, I better get some toilet paper. I don't know. Yeah. Anything could happen. All these people are fighting for it. It must be really valuable. Or you see people going after a certain product or whatever it might be. And there's just a part of your brain that kind of switches off and says, I've got to compete with these people for something that is in limited supply. I don't know if I need it, but I'm going to get it just because I want to beat them.
Like would Jordan sneakers, like Air Jordan shoes, would that be an example of that? Because what they'll do is they'll release, they seem to almost exclusively survive off limited release shoes. They've got the Air Force Ones, I think, which those might not be Jordans. It might just be Nike. I don't know. Anyway, I don't know that they have a whole lot of like staple products, but they'll release one. Oh, there's only 250 of these. There's only 500 of those. But there's a million different, SKUs, right, of these limited release products. And then they'll give or sell, I guess, one of the initial, before the release happens, of this new release to, an NBA player, a celebrity, whoever. Mm-hmm. And then the story is, oh, Steph Curry is wearing it's a bad example. He wears Under Armour, but such and such player is wearing the, brand new, not yet released shoe. Mm-hmm. And then they sell 250 of them and then it's over.
Yeah. Well, there's a few things working there. So it's interesting that you brought up that model, because I actually did a video and wrote an article about Nike. And part of that article, I was looking at, how basically Air Jordans became like this classic shoe and like the different sort of principles that they were using. So if you remember, I don't remember because I was probably not born yet or like a year old. But when Michael Jordan first came into the NBA, he was a good player, but he wasn't like Michael Jordan like we know him today, right? He didn't have the power of that celebrity.
Yeah.
And at the time, the big celebrity players, so you had like Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, they worked with Converse. And so Michael Jordan said, I want to work with Converse. So we went to Converse and Converse said, okay, maybe, but we can't give you enough attention. Like, you're not going to be a star here. And so he was like, okay, that's not really for me. He went to Adidas or Adidas, depending on where you're from. And Adidas basically said, oh, sorry, there's some internal stuff going on. We really can't partner on a shoe. So he talked to Nike, and his mom had to persuade him to talk to Nike because he didn't want to talk to Nike because they were a teeny tiny company and they mostly made track and field, right? So they weren't really known for basketball shoes, anything like that. And so he finally was like, okay, fine, I'll work with this. What are they called? Nike, and they worked together and they created the shoe. And he wore the shoe in the NBA, I think for a year or 18 months before it was available to the public. So just like you see now, right? So it's the blueprint of how they do this. And as he kind of went through the first, few years in the NBA, his star started to rise because obviously he's Michael Jordan. He's very skilled. And he started to become that, like mega celebrity. I don't even think we really have mega celebrities like that anymore, where, there's just a few. It's like Michael Jackson, Michael Jordan, and they were like the biggest celebrities on the planet. And he was wearing these shoes. And when they would drop them, they would do exactly what you're talking about. So he had the power of sort of the halo effect, right? Yeah. He's a great basketball player. He's a mega celebrity. And he wears Air Jordans. So I'm a kid. I want Air Jordans because I want to be like Mike, if you remember like all the different taglines. And that drove desire for the shoe, the fact that he had it. But then Nike basically underestimated the demand for the shoe. So accidentally created scarcity because they just didn't think this many people were going to want this Air Jordan shoe. And that made the Air Jordan shoe like the shoe to get because you couldn't get it. Michael Jordan had it and you really, really wanted it. So it was that combination again of like a few different principles, the halo effect, scarcity, and a couple of other things kind of coming together that made that like such a desirable shoe. And I think like probably purposely or not, they looked at that and said like, oh God, that worked. So how do we do that again? And you kind of see it to this day, right? You put the shoe on somebody, you can't get the shoe, but you see the shoe, you get a little bit of the halo effect from whoever it might be. And you go, so I really want that.
Tactic. This is a tactic that's very, I don't think anyone has an ethical problem with it, right? If I'm going to go search for a product and I know that they could have made more, but they didn't, and part of why I want it is because it's unavailable, nobody's mad. Nobody has an ethical complaint. Whereas if a company misrepresents the scarcity and they says, "Oh my gosh, only a few left," like that.
But there's 100.
Yeah, but there's 100. There's plenty. And that, like, I think the airline ticket example, Sean, is kind of that, because it's like, you're not saying that the flight's full, you're saying at this price and what you're going to raise it by $5 tomorrow, I'll be fine.
Yeah.
But if you lie to me and say, oh, we don't have very many, I don't know if I can get you in, and I find out you're lying, I'm very upset. So that's an easy example of where the ethical line is. But it seems like some of the tactics, not just the way that companies go about implementing the tactics, but the overall tactic is usually on one side or the other of some ethical line that we all kind of agree on. How do companies find that line?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think there's a couple different things, right? There's this concept of like dark or deceptive patterns, right? So do I design an experience to purposely make it really difficult to like cancel, to get a refund? I hide things that I should be showing you. Like, that's stuff that, when people are doing it, they probably know it's wrong, right? They're probably like, oh, this isn't like super ideal, but we want to make it really hard for people to cancel whatever subscription it might be. And we know that if we do that, we can maybe like, get a couple extra months out of them just because they can't figure out how to cancel. But now you'll also see things where basically like you go on, it's really easy to buy something and you do it online and then you've got to call in to cancel something. Like they know that that's kind of shady.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of and I get frustrated with those companies where they've seemingly intentionally made it difficult to cancel the service. Cable companies historically, very difficult. Yeah. To disentangle yourself from. What do you think are the decisions that people get wrong? When you go in and you're making decisions as a consumer, you've got all these tactics that are being used against you to guide you and nudge you into certain decisions. Are there some decisions that you see people really fail at or mess up with?
Yeah, I mean, I think just getting emotional about purchases is like the number one thing because, there's that metaphor of like the rider and the elephant, right? We have a rational brain and emotional brain. The rider on the elephant is the rational brain and the elephant is the emotional brain. And the rider thinks they have control, but if that elephant wants to go someplace, they're both going, right? Yeah, and this is the problem is, when you get into a situation where you let your emotions kind of take control of the decisions that you make rash decisions. You don't, step away from the environment in which you're making this decision. So a trick that I like to use if I'm going into, let's say, we'll use Nordstrom as an example, right? Go into Nordstrom and you see like, oh, blazer, it's a $200 blazer. Oh, it's beautiful. I always do a mental exercise. And I say, if I pick this blazer off the rack at Target, would I buy this? If I changed my environment and this was someplace that was like a little less upscale, is it still appealing? And if the answer is no, well, then it's, obviously the environment of where I am, the things that are surrounding me, the brand potentially of this particular blazer are things that are influencing my emotions. So I think that's one mental trick you can do is kind of take something that you're really, excited about and do something else with it. Again, I think like impulsivity or I guess compulsivity Obviously, I'm not like a psychologist, so I can't speak to like people who are like addicted to shopping and things like that. But, knowing how your brain sort of reacts to buying things, you get like a little hit of dopamine when like the package shows up at your door. Is there something that you can do that isn't buying something, but is still giving you that little hit of dopamine? For me, like I'll just put items in a virtual shopping cart. I never buy them, but they're in my shopping cart. And they're in my shopping cart usually until they're sold out. And then it's like, well, all I really wanted was the thrill of putting it in the shopping cart. I didn't really want to buy it, or instituting things like 1 in, 1 out policies.
So you're finding you're getting that dopamine hit without having to spend the money just by putting the thing in the shopping cart. That's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting.
Totally.
I've seen investors struggle with that issue on stock prices. Whereas this, I don't know if it's a scarcity, or you tell me if it's the wrong biases. But if somebody bought Nike at 150 because they thought it was a good company and a good brand and a dominant player in their space, and they bought it at $150 a share, and then it drops 10% to 135, and they go, oh, maybe I make a decision. No, if you thought it was all these things at 150, it's a better buy at 135, unless something else has changed. But it seems to not work on those price discounts. Don't seem to work on stocks for some reason. It works on tomatoes, it works on shirts, it works on cars, but it doesn't seem to work on stocks.
It's the opposite.
If there's a price decrease, people run from there like, I don't want to buy it at that price. I don't want to buy it at a 10% discount.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing with stocks, isn't it? It's like you have to like zoom out for it's the time part. It's the x-axis.
Yeah.
Yes, the x-axis. It's you look at, I think today was a pretty rough day in the stock market, as I could tell from the all red headlines I saw on the website that I just visited. I was like, oh God, should I check my portfolio? And I'm like, no, it's better not. It's better unknown. Let's just put it that way. But yeah, I think I don't know if scarcity is necessarily what I would call it. I think it's that loss aversion idea, isn't it? Like you spent $150 on a stock and you feel like $40 has been taken away. Even if $60 gets added tomorrow, today I feel like I lost $40. And actually we know that the psychological pain of losing something is twice, a little bit more than twice, the joy of gaining something. So in other words, if I give you $20, you're going to be like a 5 out of 10 on the emotional scale. Like, oh, that's awesome, $20. If I steal $20, if I mug you and take $20 away, it's going to be a 10 on the pain scale. You are going to be really upset because that was your $20 and you want it back. So I think that's probably partially what's at play.
Yeah.
Yeah. That loss aversion is huge. And that's got to play that plays a huge role in the disconnect that we have with stock prices and why we treat that investment or that purchase so differently from products. I learned so much, Jen, from our conversation with you. Thank you so much for making time for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. Where can people find you and learn more about how to make better choices?
Yeah, I think probably the best place to go is just choicehacking.com. So that's my website where I talk a lot about how businesses use, cognitive bias, behavioral science principles, and I explain a bunch of principles and things. I also have a book called Choice Hacking. I kept it really simple. Everything's called Choice Hacking. A book called Choice Hacking about, how businesses, again, are using some of these principles, and also a podcast called Choice Hacking. I'm not very creative with the names. Where, I kind of go through, and my podcast is not an interview podcast. It's sort of like little stories about how businesses apply these different principles. It's about 10 minutes long. So it won't compete with Decidedly. Definitely.
I did listen to a few episodes.
Snackable.
It's really easy to listen to because it's bite-sized pieces on these very concepts that you talked about. So I really liked it. So much great. So my takeaways from our discussion with Jen, really, I've got 4 separate takeaways. One is looking at how do we as consumers, or how do we make better decisions, knowing that we are being sort of attacked by these tactics of utilizing our behavioral biases against us. So one was sort of the awareness, making sure that we're aware of that these biases are being used against us. Number two is the environmental engineering she talked about. In other words, you're leaving the money at home, leaving your phone at home, so you're not susceptible to these tactics. And the third was using friction to your advantage. In other words, making it more difficult for you to succumb to these tactics. The fourth was just being aware of the emotionality that's inserted into the buying decision, particularly with things like limited supplies, social proof. So just an awareness of that emotionality and really seeking to avoid having that play into the decision making.
You know, we're gonna have to let me go first sometime on this, because it makes it look like I don't know anything when I go, hey, yeah, what he said.
Especially when I roll 4 of them.
He picked 4? I had no chance. I had no chance to come up with anything original. That was it. It was those 4 points.
You know, saying you can't think of anything else.
Oh, what?
You got nothing after that big long discussion. You got nothing.
Here's what mine was going to be: was friction.
Okay,
and that you can use that. A business can use that to make their lives easier, to increase revenue. But as a consumer, if we're hoping to make smart money choices, we can create friction in our own life, whether it's to avoid habits that we don't want to participate in, or expenses that we don't want to participate in. Thanks for listening to this episode of Decidedly. I hope you learned something. I know I did. If you thought our show was 5-star worthy, please check us out on iTunes and give us a 5-star review. It really helps out a lot, helps people find our community and defeat bad decision making in their own lives. Check us out at decidedlypodcast.com and on Facebook and Instagram at Decidedly Podcast. Until next time, I'm Sanger Smith with Sean Smith. This is Decidedly.
Insights, advice, and comments provided by Sean Smith, Sanger Smith, and speakers identified as part of the Decidedly podcast should not be considered recommendations. Speakers who are not identified as members of Decidedly are expressing their own opinion, and their statements should not be construed as reflecting the views of the Decidedly team. This podcast is produced solely for informational purposes, not personalized advice.